So a few weeks back, this post showed up in my LinkedIn feed saying that while everyone keeps arguing about solar and wind, Japan had quietly switched on a power plant that never stops. The one technology nobody is talking about, and it was spreading fast with hundreds of reactions and dozens of reposts. The pitch was that a plant in Fukuoka could make electricity just by mixing river water with seawater, with no fuel and no emissions, running around the clock, and one number I saw claimed it could power 372 million people. Now I have spent over a decade taking first-of-a-kind energy tech from a lab result all the way to something a bank will actually finance. So this is exactly the kind of claim I stop and pull apart, which is why I went and grabbed every peer-reviewed cost study I could find, 16 sources in all, and built the financial model myself. And here is where I landed, and I will just tell you up front. Plenty of people reacted, but almost nobody actually checked the math. And when you do check it, the physics turns out to be real and genuinely elegant. But as a way to actually power the grid, it is overhyped, while as a quiet little efficiency trick in one very specific spot, it is genuinely clever. And I will show you exactly where. So stick around to the end, and you'll walk out with the one question that cuts through almost any energy pitch, plus the single number that makes or breaks osmotic power specifically. So let's start with the thing I actually read about. In the summer of 2025, a plant switched on in Fukuoka, Japan, billed as one of the first of its kind anywhere, and it sits right next to a seawater desalination plant, making electricity purely from the difference in salt between two streams of water. So on paper, it's about the cleanest story you can tell, with two flows of water going in and electricity coming out, nothing burned and nothing emitted. It makes about 880,000 kilowatt hours a year, and I want you to hang on to that number because we're coming back to it. The headline and the actual hardware are telling two completely different stories. The technology even has a name, pressure retarded osmosis, and to figure out whether that big claim holds up, you've really got to meet the company that bet on this first and then walked away. Because here's what that post didn't mention. This isn't a new idea at all, and Fukuoka is the latest chapter, not the first. The first chapter belongs to Statkraft, Norway's state-owned power giant, a company that's lived and breathed hydropower for over a century. So if anybody on Earth knows how to turn moving water into money, it's these guys. And back in 2009, they built the world's first osmotic power prototype, ran it for years, talked about scaling up to a 2-megawatt plant, and publicly projected commercial osmotic power by 2020. Then, in 2014, they shut it down and walked away. Keep that one in your back pocket, because one of the most experienced water power operators on the planet looked at this for 5 years and then quit, and we're about to find out exactly what they saw. After Statkraft, the field basically went quiet, and today, in 2026, the entire global osmotic fleet is just two little demonstrations, a Danish plant from 2023 running on super salty brine, and the Fukuoka one from 2025, the one off my LinkedIn feed. On the readiness scale engineers use, 1 through 9, that's a 4, maybe a 5, demo plants with zero commercial standalone ones anywhere, 17 years in. But to understand why it's stuck there, you need to see how it actually works, and the mechanism really is gorgeous, which is exactly the part that keeps pulling smart people back in. Okay, the physics. You put a special membrane between seawater and fresh water, one that lets water molecules through but stops the salt, and because salt pulls water toward it, that's osmosis, the same force keeping the cells in your body alive. Fresh water crosses the membrane into the salty side, trying to water it down. Here's the clever bit. You keep that salty side under pressure and the fresh water still crosses because osmosis is strong enough to shove against the pressure, so every liter that comes across shows up as extra water that's already pressurized, which means you end up with more high pressure water than you started with, and when you run that through a turbine, the turbine makes electricity. There's no fuel, no emissions, and no weather problem either, because the salt gradient doesn't care whether it's cloudy or dead calm. And every cubic meter of river water that mixes into the sea gives off about 1.4 megajoules of usable energy. And to put that in perspective, that's roughly the electricity you'd get from dropping that whole cubic meter of water off a 40-story building, about 140 meters. So multiply that by every river mouth on the planet, and you get the big claim, and there's a real, sourceable number underneath the hype. Tap every river mouth on Earth, and the total physical potential is something like a fifth of all the electricity the world uses. And that part is genuinely true. The catch is everything standing between that ceiling and what you can actually build and pay for. Free energy, forever, anywhere a river meets the sea. Put it like that, and who wouldn't want to fund it? That's the pitch, and it's a good one. Now here's the physics nobody puts in the press release. So remember Statkraft walking away in 2014? This is the number they hit. It's called membrane power density, basically, how many watts you get per square meter of membrane. And this single number decides whether osmotic power is a power plant or a science project. To be commercially viable at all, the literature says you need around 5 watts per square meter, and to be as cheap per watt as an ordinary solar panel, the benchmark everyone measures capital cost against, you'd need 56.4. In a lab, on a perfect little square of membrane under perfect conditions, people have hit 12 to 14, but a real full-scale plant comes in at about 2.8. 2.8 against the 56 you'd need to beat solar, which means real osmotic power runs at roughly 1/20th of what would make it competitive. And it's not even just missing the target, it's missing the viability line, the 5, by nearly half. And low power density isn't some detail you engineer your way out of. It's a money-burning machine, because if each square meter only gives you 2 watts, then you need an enormous amount of membrane, the Fukuoka class. Design needs about 45,000 square meters of high-tech membrane just to net roughly 100 kilowatts. And if you do the division, that's a basketball court of membrane to run about 1 microwave oven. And it gets worse because the ocean fouls the membranes, so you've got to keep cleaning them. You have to pre-treat the incoming water, and the pumps moving all that water eat about 10% of your output before it even leaves the plant. So by the time you net it all out, whole plant efficiency lands around 60 to 75% of gross. The physics gives, and the engineering takes most of it right back. Now, you might be thinking, but membranes will get better, and the most detailed plant-scale work ran exactly that scenario, only to find that once you push membranes past about 10 watts per square meter, you barely gain anything, because by then, it's the pumps, the pre-treatment, and the pressure vessels that cost the money, not the membrane. So better membranes don't actually save this, it's the whole system that's expensive, and membranes aren't even one and done because fouling and pressure cycling mean you're replacing them on a schedule, which makes them a recurring bill, not an asset you buy once. That, right there, is what Statkraft saw. Now let's put some real dollars on it. So what does the electricity actually cost? I lined up every peer-reviewed techno-economic study I could find, and the honest answer is a range, but the range is the whole story. For a standalone plant, the version in the big claim, the agency estimates run from about $150 all the way up to $300 per megawatt hour, with your river mouth case sitting near the top of that, call it $2. something a kilowatt hour. If you pair it with super salty brine and bolt it onto stuff that already exists, the best current tech gets you down toward the bottom of that band, maybe 200, and the absolute dream case, using membranes that only exist in a lab, touches the 70 to 140 range that even Statkraft projected for a mature plant. Now hold that against the right benchmark, and this part matters, because Osmotic sells itself as firm, around-the-clock power, so the honest comparison is other firm power, not raw solar or wind that only run when the sun is up or the wind is blowing. Firm, dispatchable power trades near $90 a megawatt hour. Raw solar and wind look cheaper on paper, but the moment you add the storage to make them run 24/7, the way Osmotic claims to, their cost climbs too. So on an apples-to-apples, firm-to-firm basis, Osmotic's fantasy scenario barely ties the market, while its real scenario costs 2 to 4 times too much. Statkraft did this exact math, with real hardware sitting in the water, and then they left. There's even peer-reviewed work whose whole point is that this family of tech is economically infeasible, and the argument is that cheaper parts probably can't ever close the gap because the membranes alone are 50 to 80% of the capital cost, and you just saw how much membrane this thing eats. And to be totally fair here, pressure retarded osmosis is actually the best one in its whole family, since its cousins, reverse electrodialysis and nanopore generators, come in even pricier, so I'm really not beating up on the weak version. This is the champion of salinity gradient power, and it's still losing to the market by 2 to 4 times. So is there anywhere this actually makes sense? Yeah, there is, and it's the exact thing the big claim gets backwards. So, back to Fukuoka, and that 880,000 kilowatt hours I told you to remember. Fukuoka isn't really a power plant at all. It's an efficiency gadget bolted onto a desalination plant, and as one of those, it's genuinely smart. See, a diesel plant has a waste problem because it spits out super concentrated brine, twice as salty as the sea, and getting rid of that brine costs money, so Fukuoka takes that waste brine, free and already concentrated, feeds it into the osmotic unit on one side with treated wastewater on the other, and uses the electricity to knock down the diesel plant's own power bill. 2 waste streams in, a smaller utility bill out, that's a real, honest little win. But look at what it takes, because the math only works if you co-locate it with a concentrated brine source and a fresh water source sitting right side by side, and that quietly shrinks your market from every coastline on Earth down to the back lot of a coastal desalination plant. And the output, that 880,000 kilowatt hours, is about 100 kilowatts running continuously, which is 1/30th of a single modern wind turbine. So that's not an energy transition. It's a nice accessory, useful and real, and about 1,000,000 times smaller than the claim that pulled me in. One more lens before the verdict, because capital always leaves fingerprints. So who's actually in this space? You've got membrane makers like Toyobo, a couple of national labs, a few small ventures, plus some government demo money. And who's not in it? Venture capital, and the energy majors, because 17 years on, with one very public fail pioneer sitting right there, the smart money has looked at osmotic power and quietly kept its wallet shut. And when nobody who actually profits from being right is willing to put money in, that silence is data too. Alright, let's actually score it. 5 gates, 0 to 10. On maturity, I give it a 4, because we've got real demos, but 0 commercial standalone plants, and the pioneer quit after 5 years. On economics, a 2, since it's 2 to 4 times the price of firm power, and even the best case needs membranes that don't exist outside a lab. Scale-up potential is a 3, because a basketball court of membrane to run a microwave is a brutal thing to scale, and the market's fenced into diesel sites anyway. Moat, team, and capital, I'll give a 4, The membrane IP is real, but capital already voted, and it voted no. And timing, a 3, because 17 years in, it's still a demo plant. So when you add it all up, osmotic power as a way to power the grid is overhyped, while as an efficiency bolt-on for a desalination plant, it's real, narrow, and worth keeping an eye on. And here's the one thing I really want you to keep. For osmotic power, one number told the whole story: watts per square meter, the power density, because that is what decides whether a salinity gradient plant is a real power station or a science project. And the universal question for any energy source is just this: what does it cost in dollars per megawatt hour against what the grid already pays? Because free energy isn't the same thing as cheap electricity, and thermodynamics doesn't pay the capital costs. That one distinction is all it took for me to read my LinkedIn post the way I did. So that's the verdict. And look, everything I just walked you through, the conclusion and all the numbers behind it, that's yours for free. That's the show. But if you want the whole thing, exactly how I got here, I've packaged it all up. The full research report, plus the financial model itself, the actual spreadsheet, with every assumption sourced and every cell editable, so you can swap in your own inputs and run your own scenarios. And it's yours for free. I just ask that you tell me a little about what you're working on, so I know who's out there and what to tear down next. It's all at bankable.show, and honestly, it's the thing I'd have killed for back when I was doing this for a living. Before you go, though, I want your pick for what's next. So there's a poll in the community tab with fusion, green hydrogen, and next-gen geothermal, or you can just write your own in the comments, and whatever the most of you ask for is the next tier down, so subscribe, and you'll see which one I dig into next. This is Bankable. Scored verdicts, cited numbers,